Hello, I'm Orville. I buried my wife while my daughter danced at a Taylor Swift concert. And that wasn't even the worst part. They claimed they forgot to check the funeral date, said I was being too emotional. But behind their silence was a plan I never saw coming. They'd already split the house, sold the car, and rewritten my story in their version of the truth. What kind of family grieves like that? I thought the pain would stop at the headstone, but the betrayal kept echoing through every wall of this house. And now I've made a choice they'll never see coming. The rain tapped lightly against the windows of the funeral home, a kind of polite sorrow from the sky that matched the hush inside. I sat near the front, third pew from the altar, where the casket rested under soft white lilies. The seat beside me, Caroline's, remained stubbornly empty. I had told the usher she was coming. I had believed it myself. The people filtered in slowly, a few at a time, their umbrellas dripping and coats clinging to their backs. Family friends I hadn't seen in years came forward with hugs and murmured condolences. No one asked where my daughter was. Not yet. But I saw it in their eyes, the flicker of surprise, the glance toward the reserved seat, then quickly away. Caroline should have been there. It wasn't just a funeral. It was her stepmother's farewell, the woman who raised her since she was 8. But the chair beside me stayed empty, and I could feel my hope fading with every tick of the second hand. A woman in her 60s, someone from our church, leaned toward me. "She's not here?" I offered a thin smile. "She's held up. Something important came up." A murmur rose as the service began. I focused on the preacher's words, trying to find peace in the scripture, but my mind kept drifting to Caroline's text the night before. "I'm sorry. Dad, I bought the tickets months ago. It's Taylor Swift. I'll make it up to you." That was all. No, "I love you." No mention of Jean. Just Taylor Swift. I clenched my hands together in my lap, the left one aching from years of arthritis, the right holding back something heavier. At the reception, I stood by the coffee urn, spooning sugar into a paper cup like it was the only task that mattered. People came by, patted my back, told me how lovely the service had been. Then came Miriam Wexler, an old family friend, still sharp in both memory and judgment. "She should have been here. Orville," she said softly. I didn't meet her eyes. She had something important. Something she couldn't reschedule. She was at a concert, wasn't she? I didn't answer. I just stirred my tea. The metal spoon clinked against the paper like it was keeping time for something I'd missed long ago. I looked up briefly and caught Henry, my son, across the room. He saw me, nodded once, but didn't come over. Back home that night, the silence was louder than the rain. I sat in my study, lights dimmed, surrounded by memories, framed photos, books Jean had collected, Caroline's old drawings still pinned on the wall from when she was in grade school. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the manila folder. Inside, my will, half written. A name had been scratched out once, rewritten, scratched again. I stared at the page, the pen trembling in my hand. On the desk was a photo of Caroline when she was 9, smiling in a sunflower field. I remembered her voice, small and certain. "Promise me you'll walk me down the aisle, Daddy." That was a long time ago. A lot of promises get broken on the way. My phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw the image before the name. Caroline, in glitter and denim, smiling ear to ear at the concert, stage lights behind her arm around a friend. Her eyes lit up, not with grief, not with remembrance, but with joy. I set the phone down slowly, my face tightened, jaw locked. Something in me shifted, not anger, not quite, just a line drawn. Maybe it's time I break a few promises too. The next morning, I wandered the house picking up discarded napkins and leftover plastic utensils. The smell of lukewarm casseroles still lingered in the air. The sympathy cards were stacked neatly by the fireplace, most handwritten, full of warmth and prayers, except one, typed, cold, from Caroline. "No, dear Dad. Just, I'm sorry I couldn't attend. Please know I was thinking of you." I placed it on the mantel, stared at it for a moment, then turned it face down. Then I picked up the phone. My fingers hesitated over the contact list before landing on one name. I called. "Can we meet about the documents?" I asked. A pause. "Yes. Mr. Barker?" the voice replied. "Do you want to come into the office?" "No," I said. "Let's meet somewhere neutral. The cafe on Oak. 11 sharp." "Understood." I hung up. Let's make sure everything is finalized. The morning after the funeral should have felt lighter, like the storm had passed. But when I opened the kitchen blinds, I saw Ellen's flower bed, her favorite, flattened by the rain. The peonies she planted every spring were bent, petals darkened to the color of bruises. I turned on the coffee pot, though I hadn't tasted a thing since yesterday. The house felt too clean, too still, like someone had vacuumed the grief right out of it, leaving only echoes behind. The mail came late, as usual. A bundle of sympathy cards tied in a rubber band sat in the mailbox, most with handwritten addresses, familiar loops and swirls from old neighbors, church friends, cousins I hadn't seen in a decade. But one envelope stood out. No return address. Just my name, typed in a sans serif font like it came from an office printer. I knew before I opened it. Caroline's card was stiff, the kind you get in a mixed-value sympathy box at Walgreens. The message inside was generic, something about thoughts and prayers, loss and peace, and not one word was written by hand. I stared at it. No love of Caroline, no signature, not even her initials. A machine could have written this. Maybe it did. I set the card on the counter, then slid it under a newspaper. Out of sight, not out of mind. Later that morning, Hank dropped by. He didn't call first, just showed up with 2 coffees and a bag of lemon muffins he knew I never liked, but Jean used to love. "Thought I'd check in," he said, stepping inside like he hadn't been here in years. We sat at the table in silence for a while. The coffee was hot, but it didn't do much. He looked around the kitchen, at the empty chair where Ellen used to sit. Then, carefully, he spoke. "I didn't see Caroline yesterday. I kept my eyes on my mug. She had prior commitments. Hank didn't press, not right away, but then he said, real quiet. You know Ellen raised her since she was 6. My fingers tightened around the cup. I know. There wasn't much else to say. He looked like he wanted to keep going, but stopped himself. That was Hank. Always knew where the line was. Still, his words lingered in the air like dust. I changed the subject, started talking about some yard work I'd been meaning to do, even though we both knew I wouldn't touch it for weeks. Before he left, I mentioned, offhand, something about needing to meet with someone about some documents. I didn't say which ones. I didn't need to. That evening, I found myself back in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, the television off. The sun had dipped below the trees. The room glowed dim orange through the blinds, like it couldn't decide between day and night. My phone buzzed. Caroline. "Dad, it's just, everyone grieves differently. Funerals are optional. Let's talk next week." I read it twice, then a third time. Optional. Like a dentist appointment. Like jury duty. I started to reply, typed something sharp, then backspaced it all, wrote something softer. Deleted again. I put the phone down and looked around the room. This house had seen Caroline's first piano recital, her high school prom photos taped to the mirror, the tears after her first heartbreak. I carried her through croup, through college move-in day, through every moment she forgot to say thank you. And now this. It wasn't just the funeral she missed, it was everything that came before it. The room grew darker. The only light came from the computer screen in the corner. I walked over slowly, opened the inbox. I clicked forward on her message. Sent it to Ferg, my lawyer. Subject line, foundational material. I didn't add anything else. Then I opened an old document. Will, draft 2020. I stared at it a long time, then renamed it. Will, draft 2024. The cursor blinked on a line that used to be simple. Beneficiary. It blinked, waiting, like it wanted me to hesitate. But I didn't. I typed nothing, just whispered, no more loopholes. And tomorrow, I'll walk into that office and say exactly what I want changed. Morning came gray and slow, as if the sky itself was still morning. I hadn't slept much, just drifted in and out while the cursor on the screen blinked back at me, frozen on that one word, beneficiary. The smell of the house had changed, too. It had that stillness that only arrives after the last guest has left, and nothing remains but folded napkins and silent rooms. I told myself I needed an old photo frame. That's why I headed down to the basement. But deep down, I knew I was chasing something less tangible. The air was damp and sharp down there, heavy with years. The light bulb flickered when I pulled the chain. As I bent to move a stack of old boxes, one caught my eye. E+O, 1977, scribbled across a soggy flap in Ellen's handwriting, barely visible through a water stain. The box let out a musty exhale when I opened it. Inside, I found our wedding album, its leather cover warped and curling at the corners. Beneath it, a map of our honeymoon road trip, folded and torn, a few of her letters, a pressed daisy, and tax documents no one had touched since the early 90s. I pulled out the album, brushing away a web across the spine. The photos inside had bled into each other slightly from the moisture. Ellen's smile, radiant in her lace dress, blurred into mine. I ran my fingers across the page. So this is where our love story ends, I thought. Between receipts and forgotten books. I didn't hear the phone ring until the third time. I climbed the stairs slowly, album in one hand, the other gripping the railing. In the kitchen, the caller ID read, Laura calling. I let it ring once more, then picked up. Hello? Orville. Her voice was bright at first, polite. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, I lied. She filled a moment with soft talk, flowers, casseroles from the church. Then, a pause. I didn't want to say it during the service, but was Caroline okay? I held Ellen's coffee mug, still bearing her faint lipstick from the last time she used it. The handle felt smaller in my hand now. She grieves differently, I said. Laura sighed gently. Grieving doesn't mean disappearing. There it was, a truth no one else had dared say aloud. I said nothing. If you ever need to talk, she added, trailing off kindly. I know. We said our goodbyes, her voice fading like a hymn left unsung. That night, I placed the wedding album on my nightstand. The smell of mildew lingered, but I didn't mind. I opened to a photo of us at the reception, her laughing, head tilted back, joy radiating from her like light. I hadn't seen that look in years. On the back page, in her cursive, If I ever leave first, don't forget us, I whispered. I never could. The room blurred. A memory surfaced. Caroline in third grade, calling Ellen Mom during a school play. Ellen had beamed so brightly, but now, silence. Caroline hadn't called at all, not the night of the funeral, not since the text. It wasn't grief that kept her away, I thought. It was something else. Later, in my office, I sat at the desk and took a fresh sheet of paper. I began a letter. Dear Caroline, you don't owe me an apology. But I hope someday you'll understand the space between us wasn't carved by funerals, it was built by choices. I didn't send it. Instead, I wrote another note to Ferg. Include Ellen's original vows in the memorial trust. I looked at the photo on the shelf, our wedding portrait, taken in golden light. You deserved better, I whispered to Ellen. And maybe, so do I. Just then, the computer screen lit up. A notification flashed. New transfer request, $9 to $200, from Caroline Turner. I stared at the number. No message, no reason, just digits. And there it is. The real eulogy. Downtown was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning. The brick buildings lined up like old men at a barber shop, stoic and faded. I pulled into the parking lot of Ferg's office and sat still for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the engine before I turned it off. The folder on the passenger seat was already bent at the corners. I picked it up and stepped into the building. The receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile. She looked about the same age as Caroline when Ellen first brought her to live with us. Her eyes sparkled with politeness, but they didn't linger. Just enough warmth to get you to the waiting area. Then back to her keyboard. As I took my seat, I glanced around the lobby. A framed photo of Ellen at the community fundraiser hung proudly on the wall. She was holding a pie, wearing that ridiculous yellow cardigan I used to tease her about. Her grin could have melted the coldest soul. She used to believe in giving, I thought, even to those who gave nothing back. Across from me, a father and his teenage daughter were laughing over a phone screen. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and I turned away. Some things felt like pinpricks now, too small to cry over, too sharp to ignore. Ferg's assistant called me in shortly after. His office hadn't changed since the last time. Same dark wood desk, same books he probably hadn't read in years. He stood up. "Orville, I was just thinking about you." I nodded, placed the folder on the edge of his desk, and sat. "I'd like to revisit my estate distribution." He blinked. "You're thinking of updating the will?" I leaned back, folding my hands. "Yes. I'd like to remove Caroline as primary beneficiary." Ferg opened a drawer and pulled out the original documents. "Ellen's version left everything to Caroline. You were always secondary." "I know." He flipped a few pages. She was clear about it. She said, verbatim, "No matter what, Caroline deserves the chance to start over without worrying about money." She didn't live to see what Caroline turned into. Ferg looked at me. Not judgmental, just measured. "You're sure about this?" "I'm certain." He tapped his pen against the desk. "It'll change the dynamic. This will create division. A fracture that may never heal." I slid my phone across the desk. She requested nearly $10,000 this week. No explanation. He didn't touch the phone. Still, Ellen texted her before the surgery. Caroline never replied. Didn't visit. Didn't even call the night Ellen passed. I took a breath, then reached into my coat and pulled out a photo. I laid it down carefully in front of him. Our wedding day. Framed. "You knew her," I said. "Tell me she'd be okay with this silence." Ferg didn't speak. He just stared at the picture like it had started breathing again. After a while, he exhaled through his nose and reached for a clean draft. "Let's start from here." The sun shifted through the blinds, cutting strips of light across the desk. I watched the pen in my hand tremble slightly as I signed. Caroline's name was struck through. I added a clause. She could still receive a small memorial disbursement if she visited Ellen's grave within 1 year. Otherwise, the trust would revert to charity. Ferg looked up from the page. "This is legally sound. But personally?" Personal ended the night she didn't show up. The office grew quiet again, just the whisper of pages turning and the soft thud of the seal stamp. As I gathered my coat, I turned once more to the wall in the lobby. Ellen's fundraiser photo still hung there, unnoticed by everyone who passed it every day. I reached up, gently unhooked it from the nail, and tucked it inside my coat. "If she couldn't protect her memory," I whispered, "I will." The evening crept in like fog off the mountains, slow, thick, and hard to shake. I sat in the living room, the old floor heater humming beneath my feet, scrolling through photos on my phone without really seeing any of them. On the television, muted home videos flickered. Caroline, 5 years old, shrieking in joy as she ran across our backyard in a tutu. Ellen was just out of frame, laughing. My thumb slipped, and suddenly Caroline's face filled the screen, live, streaming. Her apartment behind her was full of soft lighting and pastel throw pillows. Her voice was chirpy, casual, like she was talking about a new yoga class. "I just think it's okay to prioritize joy," she said, tucking her hair behind one ear. "Funerals are just rituals for the living. Anyway, I choose memories over caskets." I froze. The video kept going, but I'd already heard what I needed to. I locked the phone and laid it on the armrest. Then I stood and walked slowly down the hallway. Ellen's urn sat quietly on the mantel, next to the folded flag from her father's service. "She wasn't a ritual," I whispered. "She was real, and she deserved more." Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, the phone face down on my nightstand. It buzzed. "Hey, Dad. Hope you're doing okay. I saw you updated the will draft." I didn't move. 2 minutes later, another ping. "I get you're upset, but don't you think this is a bit dramatic?" Dramatic. I picked up the phone, looked at the screen, then set it back down without replying. I'd spent the last few days erasing traces of a life Ellen built, sorting photos, old dresses, her recipe cards. Nothing about that felt dramatic. I reached for the notebook on my nightstand and scribbled a line across the top of a blank page. Sometimes silence is a scream. When I awoke the next morning, the first light hadn't yet cleared the trees, but I dressed and drove to the churchyard anyway. I brought tulips, Ellen's favorite, and brushed snow off her headstone with my coat sleeve. "She called you a formality," I said aloud. The wind rustled the dry grass, carrying with it the scent of pine needles and cold earth. I knelt and placed the flowers gently, then reached into my coat pocket. The printed screenshot from Caroline's live stream was folded in half, and I unfolded it, smoothed it flat, and set it beside the tulips. "She said once," I murmured, "if people show up, it means you mattered." I stayed there for a while. The church bell rang the hour, but I didn't move. Eventually, the cold bit through my knees, and I stood. "You mattered," I said to the stone, "even if she's forgotten how." The drive home passed in silence. No radio, no news, just the steady hum of the tires against the road. Back on my front porch, I sat with a thermos of coffee and the quiet buzz of cicadas under the late morning sun. The phone rang. It was Ferg. "Do you want me to formally notify Caroline?" he asked. I shook my head, though he couldn't see me. "No," I said after a pause. "Let her find out when she needs to." I ended the call and went inside. From the bookshelf, I pulled down the old wooden box where we kept keepsakes. I found the envelope addressed to Ash, Caroline's daughter, my granddaughter. Inside, I placed a photo of Ellen holding baby Ash, Ellen's face full of light and pride, and a handwritten note, "Your grandmother loved you quietly. That was her way." I sealed it and walked to the mailbox. Back inside, the phone buzzed again. Caroline. I watched the name light up the screen, then fade away as the call rang out. Not every silence needs to be broken. The kettle hadn't even finished whistling when I opened my laptop that morning. The screen blinked awake, and so did I, straight into the fire. Subject line: urgent, potential elder abuse filing under review. It took me 3 tries to open the email. My fingers, clumsy from age or shock, couldn't seem to obey. I read each line as if it were written in another language. Legal jargon cloaked betrayal like silk on a knife. Concern has been raised regarding recent estate modifications, sudden changes without prior consultation, possible mental impairment affecting decision-making. I stood up, pouring the coffee too fast, splashing it over the edge of my mug. The heat stung, but not enough to distract me from what had just unfolded. Caroline had lawyered up. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war. 2 hours later, I was standing in Ferg's office with a printed copy of the email. Edges wrinkled from my grip. "She's contacting Family Law Council now?" Ferg asked, scanning the text. "She's not asking questions," I said, my voice low. "She's drafting accusations." He sighed, pulling out a thick folder. They're quoting clauses Ellen wrote in the original version. The trust for Caroline, the continuity clause. If they push for incompetency, we'll need documentation. Medical, preferably recent. "Then schedule it," I snapped. "Blood tests, puzzles, whatever they want. I'll pass any test. I may be many things, but I'm not senile." Ferg looked at me long and hard. "They're going to twist this, Orville. Frame it like you're being manipulated, by grief, by spite." I leaned forward. "No one manipulated me. They abandoned me. There's a difference." That afternoon, I met Hank at the diner off 3rd Street. Same booth we always took, near the window, smelling faintly of bacon and old coffee. I laid the email flat on the table. He read it slowly, blinking more than usual. She's really doing this? She already did, I said. I just hadn't read the footnote yet. Hank folded the paper and set it aside. What do you need from me? I need you to testify, if it goes that far. To say what? That I'm of sound mind, that I was alone at the funeral, that the only thing I buried that day was my wife, not my clarity. Hank nodded, jaw clenched. I kept the texts she sent. I'll dig up photos too. Empty pews don't lie. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The world deserves to know who never showed up. That night, back in my study, I laid out folders across the desk like a general planning a siege. One labeled Timeline, another Statements, and one in thick Sharpie, Legacy Defense. I wrote out every key event, Ellen's diagnosis, the funeral date, the live stream quote, Caroline's texts. I included screenshots, notarized copies, and even the note Ellen had scribbled in our wedding album. Don't forget us. I pulled out my phone, set it on a small tripod, and hit record. Hey, Ash, I began, my voice cracking. I don't know what you've been told, but I need you to hear this from me. Your grandmother deserved more. I tried to honor her, even when others wouldn't. This isn't about money, it's about memory, and I won't let it be rewritten. I paused, breathing slowly. Someday, you'll have questions. And this is my answer. Just as I reached to stop the recording, another ping came through, an email from Caroline. No lawyer this time, just her. The subject line read, "You've made your choice, so have I." The paper bag crinkled as Mrs. Nolan set it down on my porch swing. Just a few things from the co-op, she murmured, not quite meeting my eyes. Then, the hesitation. Everything okay? Orville? I saw Caroline's post. Her voice trailed off like she regretted asking. I didn't answer, just nodded, thanked her, and waited until her station wagon pulled away before walking inside with the bag of apples and granola bars I hadn't requested. I set them down beside my laptop. It had been nearly a week since Caroline's last email. I'd braced for silence, not an ambush. Curiosity, or perhaps masochism, pushed me to click open Facebook. There it was, a long post. Caroline's profile photo was polished, professional even. My heart is heavy, it began. It's been a difficult few months watching my once wise father spiral into grief and confusion. Beneath the words were photos, old ones, me in flannel, eyes puffy after Ellen's second round of chemo, another from last winter, taken candidly as I dozed off during a community meeting. She framed them like evidence. The comment section read like a courtroom without a judge. Thinking of you, Caroline. Grief changes people. Maybe your dad needs help he won't accept. She was feeding the wolves breadcrumbs and calling them a feast. By late morning, I made my way to the church social. Every step inside felt like walking through static, familiar faces, suddenly unfamiliar postures. Hugs were softer, eyes more inquisitive. Bill Tilden, who'd sat beside me every Sunday for 2 decades, leaned in near the coffee urn. Hey, Orv, might want to clear things up. People are wondering. Wondering what? He looked down at his cup. Just maybe talk to someone. Show folks you're okay. I wanted to say more, but what would it change? Most weren't looking for truth. They were looking for quiet. And Caroline had handed them a script. I thought of something Ellen once said, long before things fell apart. When people choose silence, they've chosen a side. That night, after dinner, I called Ash. She answered in one ring. Hey, Grandpa. Her voice was a salve. I need you to hear something from me, I said. Before the internet rewrites the whole story. I already saw it, she whispered. I figured you hadn't. There was a pause. She's rewriting your story, Grandpa. But I remember what you stood for, what you taught me. She promised to send screenshots, old messages Caroline had sent during Ellen's illness, ones that painted a very different picture than the one now spreading online. You're not losing your mind, Ash said. You're remembering who you are. Don't let her take that. Later that evening, I sat at my desk and stared at the cursor blinking on a blank post. Then I started typing, not a defense, Not a tirade, just a truth. I grieve out loud not to make noise, but to honor silence that deserved more. I included one photo, Ellen's grave, tulips from last week still fresh in the vase. Below that, a photo of us in 1978, smiling in front of our first home. No filters, no edits. I hit post. The first comments came fast, some from neighbors, others from old colleagues. Most were kind, a few weren't, but a crack had opened. Then, the phone rang. It wasn't Caroline. "Mr. Orville," a voice said, young, alert. "This is Dana Melville from the Asheville Gazette. We're working on a piece about elder legal protections. Your name's come up. Would you be open to speaking?" I didn't answer right away. She filled the silence. "We're not looking to take sides. Just tell the story fully." I looked at the framed photo on my wall, Ellen holding Ash as a baby, both of them beaming. I whispered to the air, "They say your truth is only real when someone else repeats it loud enough." The living room hadn't held this many voices since Ellen's last birthday. Today, it was quieter. No cake, no laughter, just footsteps on hardwood and polite greetings that hung awkward in the air. I nodded as each one entered. My son Nathan with his wife, the twins in tow, Caroline. Last, her smile was practiced, eyes calculating. I'd set out coffee, water, a plate of shortbread Ellen used to serve guests who overstayed their welcome. No one touched them. "Please, sit," I said. Chairs scraped, murmurs. The weight of unsaid things settled over the room like a summer thundercloud. I stood by the mantel, where Ellen's urn still rested. The clock ticked louder than it should have. "I asked you all here because I believe it's time. Time to stop speaking in half-truths and assumptions." I moved to the side table, handed out packets. Each had a name written in block letters. No surprises, no hiding. The pages inside held more than text. Screenshots, timelines, donations Ellen made, and bank transfers made by Caroline without discussion. I watched their fingers pause over specific lines. A cough, a whispered, "What the hell?" from Nathan. "This isn't about punishment," I said. "It's about honesty." Caroline flipped through hers quickly, lips tight. "Dad, if this is about that will—" "It's not just about a document," I cut in. "It's about dignity." I picked up my own packet, held it open as I began reading aloud. Caroline's recent online post, the one painting me as frail, confused, clinging to delusions. I read her words calmly, slowly, until I reached the end. Then I turned the page to her messages, dated weeks before the post, asking if she could speed up the process of the estate. Caroline stood, voice rising. "You're twisting everything. You always twist it to make me the villain." "No one said villain," I said. "Only author." The silence that followed was jagged. "I'm not going to be humiliated in my mother's house." "You've done that yourself," I replied. I walked to the side table again and tapped the laptop. The screen lit up, and Marion's face appeared. Ellen's college roommate, her friend through miscarriages and milestones. "Hi, everyone," Marion said softly. "I was asked to share something today. Ellen's final letter." Gasps. Even Caroline froze. "She wrote it the week before her last surgery. She asked me to hold it unless things ever fractured." Marion read slowly. Ellen's words were clear. She wanted the house left to Orville, not sold for convenience. She hoped for unity, but she feared manipulation. She worried, Marion added, that grief might become currency. Nathan closed his eyes. His wife wiped a tear. Caroline's hands trembled. You never told me about that letter." "You never asked," I said. "You only demanded." Caroline sat down, slower this time, her voice smaller. "I didn't mean to. It all got away from me. The lies, the money. I thought I deserved it." "You thought silence was permission," I said, steady. "But silence was grief, not surrender." The twins stood, unsure. One walked over and hugged my leg. I stroked her hair without looking down. "This house," I said, turning toward Caroline, "was never yours to rewrite." There was no explosion, just a slow exhale of energy, like a balloon deflating in a church hall. Minutes passed. People gathered their things. A few hugged me. Most didn't know how. Nathan whispered, "Thank you for the truth." Ash hugged me last. "You did it, Grandpa." I watched from the doorway as the cars rolled away, taillights fading. The house. Finally quiet. I sat in Ellen's old armchair, the packets stacked beside me. Then the buzz. I checked my phone. Ferg. A new notification blinked beneath his name. Court date confirmed. Sept. 19. Probate review. Hearing. I looked around the room again. Ellen's photo still on the mantel. Marion's letter printed and folded next to it. We weren't done. But at least, now, the truth had a seat at the table. The courthouse hallway was colder than I remembered. Polished floors, fluorescent lights, and the hum of quiet anticipation hung in the air. Ash sat beside me, flipping her phone nervously between her palms. She hadn't said much during the drive, maybe because we both knew what this day meant, or thought we did. Ferg finally stepped out from the courtroom, adjusting his tie, eyes heavy, one look, and my stomach sank. "They've delayed the session," he said, voice low. Caroline's attorney submitted new evidence last night. The judge granted a 2-week review. Ash exhaled sharply beside me. I clenched the wooden bench. "New evidence?" I asked. Ferg nodded. "Emails, dated further back than we anticipated. She's arguing confusion. Possible early signs of incapacity." I didn't answer, just nodded once. Slow. It was like tripping right before the finish line and having to crawl the rest of the way. Back in his office later, I paced. The cheap carpet worn down in places where men like me probably had paced before. Ferg stayed silent for a while, letting me vent. "Justice," I muttered, "used to mean something. Used to be a straight line. Now it's curved like every damn thing else. I fought wars simpler than this." Ferg nodded. "I know." I looked at the framed photo on his shelf. Ellen and me at a church fundraiser, smiling, no weight behind our eyes. I remembered how she used to say, "If you have to twist it to make it fair, it was never fair to begin with." Later that evening, back home, I dropped my keys onto the side table and noticed the envelope wedged under the front door. No return address, no markings. I sat at the kitchen table, slid it open. Inside was a single photo, Ellen and Marion, arm in arm, laughing beside the old rose trellis we tore down 20 years ago. On the back, in Marion's careful handwriting, she left something behind. Check the music box. My heart caught. Upstairs, I opened the cabinet in our bedroom. The music box had sat there untouched since Ellen passed. Her favorite, worn mahogany with little brass hinges. It played Moon River when wound, soft and warbly with age. I turned it over, pressed at the base, a soft click. False bottom. Inside, folded carefully, was another envelope, older, edges yellowing. I opened it, hands trembling more than I'd allow myself to admit. A signed will, dated 2 months before Ellen died, in her own handwriting, witnessed, notarized, leaving everything, the house, the land, the personal effects, to me. No mention of the joint trust, no conditions, just, "To Orville James Nolan, my husband and the keeper of my peace." I stared at the page for a long while. It changed everything. And I wasn't going to tell anyone. Not yet. Let Caroline think she'd won a delay. Let her preen and posture. I'd waited longer than this for less. I could wait a little longer to make it count. That night, I poured myself a glass of water, sat down at Ellen's old desk, pulled out the copies of the old will and fed them, one by one, into the fireplace. The flames caught quickly, curling the paper into silence. I looked up at Ellen's photo, soft lit by the lamp. "You knew they'd do this," I whispered. "Didn't you?" Just then, the phone rang. I checked the screen. Marion. Again. I answered, heart already pounding. "There's something else I never told you," she said. The house was silent. save for the ticking clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water when the phone rang. Midnight. Only one name flashed across the screen. Marion. Orville. Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. I wasn't honest with you. There was another letter. From Ellen. I should have told you years ago. The glass in my hand trembled slightly. I gripped the counter, my thoughts swirling. Marion had been the one person Ellen trusted, outside of me. If she had hidden something. Why now? I asked, barely louder than a breath. She hesitated. Because truth waits until it has no choice. The next morning, I drove to Marion's house. The road felt unfamiliar despite being one I'd taken for decades. When she opened the door, she looked older than I remembered, like a woman who hadn't slept through the night in years. We sat in her sunroom. She placed a small wooden box on the table between us. I found it in 1996, she said, eyes glassy. Ellen had given it to me before she got sick, said it was only for you, when the time's right. But then, after she passed and the family started falling apart, I was scared it would make things worse. I stared at her. You thought hiding Ellen's words would make anything better? I thought I was protecting you, she said, tears threatening to fall, and protecting her memory. If the letter caused division, if it made people resent her wishes, I couldn't live with that. Trust doesn't always die in a moment. Sometimes, it wilts slowly. I reached out, took the box, and opened it. Inside lay a single envelope, brittle with time. Marion's hands shook as she pushed it toward me. I unfolded the letter with care. Ellen's handwriting greeted me like an old song. Orville, if you're reading this, I've left more unsaid than I ever meant to. I know what Caroline can become. I hoped love would change her. But if it hasn't, I need you to know that I saw it coming. Don't let them divide us when I'm gone. You've given me a life of dignity. Give yourself the truth, even if others won't. I didn't speak. I just pressed the letter to my chest, eyes closed, as the morning light crept in through the curtains. By noon, I was on the road again. The lake we used to visit wasn't far. Ellen had always loved the quiet there, the stillness. The way the trees whispered without judgment. I parked and walked to the water's edge, the letter still in hand. The sun hung low, scattering gold across the ripples. I read the words again. Then I struck a match. The flame crawled across the paper, slow at first, then hungry. I held it until the last ember fell into the lake, the ash scattering like the breath of forgiveness, driving home. I didn't feel peace exactly, but I felt emptied. And sometimes that's the first step toward peace. Back at the house, I dialed Marion's number. You hurt me, I said when she answered, but I won't let that be the last thing between us. Come by tomorrow. We'll have tea. A long pause. I'd like that, she said. As I hung up, the doorbell rang. I shuffled to the front, expecting silence, but on the floor lay a white envelope, crisp and stamped. From the law offices of Barrett Lee, Caroline was contesting the new will. I stood still for a long moment, then walked back to my desk. I placed Ellen's photo next to my journal and opened to a fresh page. I wrote one line. Truth doesn't just heal, it tests who we truly are. The morning air held that crisp stillness before summer breaks loose. I opened the screen door just in time to catch the mailman's retreating back. He didn't wave this time, just a glance over the shoulder, and a nod that felt too careful. Among the envelopes, utility, a magazine I never subscribed to, a flyer for gutter cleaning, lay one with a red seal, county court notice. I didn't need to open it to know. Still, I did. My daughter was filing for an injunction, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage the estate. My fingers trembled, not with rage, but recognition. She'd spent months in shadows, whispering doubt, painting me unstable. Now, it was on paper, signed, filed, delivered. I didn't shout, didn't curse. I set the envelope on the porch table, poured myself a coffee, and stared out over the yard. Ellen once filled with lilies. A breeze moved the trees, but nothing else did. By noon, I sat in the den, the letter unfolded beside the phone. I dialed Benjamin. When he answered, I skipped pleasantries. "She's taking it to court. Claims I'm losing my mind." He exhaled hard. "We'll fight it. Orville. But they'll want proof, expert testimony, a third party. You'll need someone with weight." "She wants to put me on trial for remembering too well," I said. "Then I'll give them my truth, in full daylight." He paused. "Then we prep. Start today." 2 weeks later, I walked into the courthouse. Small, familiar. The pews held faces I'd seen in grocery aisles and church potlucks. Most avoided eye contact. Caroline sat at her table in a blue suit that didn't belong to our family's modest taste. Her lawyer, young and sharp-eyed, spoke first. "Your Honor, we present evidence that Mr. Orville Rayburn is experiencing symptoms of late-onset dementia, hallucinations, confusion, poor judgment, jeopardizing proper handling of assets." He listed moments, me forgetting a name once at church, pausing mid-sentence during a video call, a neighbor catching me talking to myself. Then, they played recordings, footage of me in the living room, facing Ellen's portrait. "I miss you, Elle. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know why she turned." I looked across the courtroom. Faces were shifting, some pity, some curiosity. When it was my turn, I stood, no script in hand. "Yes, I talked to her," I said, voice steady. "I talked to the woman who shared 52 years with me, who raised children with me, who died in a hospital bed while I held her hand. If that's madness, then let me keep it." I turned toward the judge. My memory is clear where it matters. I remember who I am. I remember what was promised. Benjamin stepped back. Then Marion was called. As she took the stand with hesitation, hands folded tight. "Mr. Rayburn speaks with grief, not delusion," she said. "He forgets small things, but he never forgets who hurt him, and who stood by him." Caroline leaned over, whispered to her lawyer. They looked rattled. I didn't smile. The judge cleared his throat. "Age," he said, "is not incompetence. Grief is not delusion. This court finds no evidence of incapacity. Petition denied." My knees nearly gave as I sat. Marion glanced back, and I nodded once. Later that evening, I returned home alone. The silence wasn't heavy. It was earned. I stood at the window, the dusk folding in. "They're fighting over what's left of me," I whispered. "But they forgot. I still get to decide what that is." The phone rang. Benjamin's voice was calm but low. "Orville, I was reviewing Ellen's old hospital files again. There's something odd, something we need to discuss." I gripped the phone tighter. "What is it?" I asked. "Let's talk in person. It's not simple." And just like that, peace was postponed again. The morning broke with that gray stillness I've come to know in this house, before coffee brews, before the birds test their first songs. I sat in my study, the same chair Ellen picked for me when we moved in. My hands rested on a folder Benjamin brought last night, Ellen's old hospital records. There it was, buried on page 5. A misdiagnosis in '96. They told her it was terminal, but 6 months later, they reversed it. She never told the kids. We decided together, let them remember the mother who hosted birthdays, not one who slipped in and out of dread. Reading it again all these years later, I whispered, "They never knew the truth, and maybe that's the real loss." By mid-morning, I found myself wandering the backyard. The dew still clung to the grass, and the soil smelled like rain, even though it hadn't come yet. My feet followed memory more than path, past the swing we hung for grace, the garden beds Ellen tended even in her last spring. I stopped under the old oak. We planted it the year our youngest turned 5. Its roots outlived our arguments, holidays, and now even the marriage it grew beside. My fingers grazed its bark. "We built something that didn't survive us," I murmured, "but maybe parts of it still breathe." Back inside, the kitchen light cast a soft gold over the table. I pulled out the old will, creased, annotated, worn from every legal shuffle Caroline forced. I held it there for a long beat, then tore it clean down the middle. The sound startled even me. I set it aside, booted up my typewriter, yes, the old one, and began drafting something new. This time, no children listed, no conditional clauses, just one beneficiary, the Fairgrove Public Library, under Ellen's maiden name. She loved that place. Volunteered there for 12 years before the diagnosis, read to kids, cataloged by hand. I remembered the way her voice softened when she spoke of that quiet little building. "They'll hate me for this," I said to the silence, "but maybe someone will read and remember." That evening, Grace stopped by. She didn't knock, just let herself in, holding a bag of tea and a tin of cookies she claimed were from a new bakery, but I suspect were store-bought. "Something feels different," she said, eyes scanning the room. I nodded toward the books I'd stacked by the door, all marked for donation. "Cleaning house?" I said. She walked over, paused at the letter on the table, the one marked, "To be opened after I'm gone." She didn't touch it, just looked at me. "I'm not asking you to understand," I said, "but I'd like you to remember." I tried. She reached for my hand. We didn't speak after that. Some things don't need sound. The next morning, before dawn, I dug into the soil beside the oak. My knees protested, but my resolve didn't. I planted a young maple, smaller, thinner, but it would grow. At the base, I buried a sealed metal box. Inside, the last photos of Ellen and me together, a cassette recording she made for Grace's wedding, and the journal she kept after her diagnosis, the one she never let anyone read. "Some things are meant for the earth," I said aloud, pressing the dirt back in place. "Not the courts." The sun rose slow behind the roofline as I stood up, brushed off my hands, and breathed in the scent of fresh dirt and old memories. That night, I sat on the porch alone. The tree stood like a quiet guard in the dark. I held Ellen's photo, placed it next to my journal. I opened to the last page and wrote, "Truth doesn't just heal, it tests who we truly are. No more edits, no more explanations. Just wind in the trees, a porch light flickering, and the stillness of something finished."